Today we're looking at Unit 7, Notes number 4, The Fight for Equality. The Latino presence grows. During the 1960s, the Latino population in the United States grew from 3 million to more than 9 million people. The Latino population includes people from several different areas, primarily Mexico, Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Central America, and South America. Mexican Americans, the largest Latino group, have lived mostly in the Southwest and California. Many came during the Mexican Revolution and during the 1940s and 50s as part of the Bracero program, a temporary laborers program. Puerto Ricans began immigrating into the U.S. after U.S. occupation of Puerto Rico in 1898. Cuban communities formed in New York City, Miami, New Jersey, as many fled Fidel Castro's communist rule. Latinos in the United States encountered ethnic prejudice and discrimination in jobs and housing. Latinos fight for change. During the 1960s, Latinos demanded not only equal opportunity but also a respect for their culture and heritage. Thousands of California's farm workers were Latinos and did back-breaking work for little pay and few benefits. In 1962, Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta established the National Farm Workers Association. Chavez believed that farm workers had to unionize to increase their bargaining strength. In 1965, when California's grape growers refused to recognize the union, Chavez launched a nationwide boycott of the company's grapes. Like MLK, Chavez believed in using nonviolence to reach his goal. Chavez even went on a 3-week fast, basically a hunger strike. And so by the end, they were able to work a deal with the grape growers to increase pay for their workers and have them recognize the union. Cultural pride. The activities of the California farm workers helped to inspire other Latino brown power movements across the country. Young Mexican Americans started to call themselves Chicanos or Chicanas, a shortened version of Mexicanos that express pride in their ethnic heritage. In 1968, the Brown Berets were formed as a community action group in Los Angeles. They organized a walkout in East LA to demand smaller classes, more Chicano teachers and administrators, and programs designed to reduce Latino dropout rates. So let's stop and think. How did the Latino communities organize in the 1960s? So you'll see very similar tactics to what was going on with the more kind of modern day civil rights movement with African Americans. Cesar Chavez definitely being inspired by Martin Luther King Jr.'s tactics of boycotts to kind of make a stand, to get businesses to change their policies. You see with the Brown Berets, lots of comparison to the Black Panthers in terms of like younger groups of people becoming, I say the word militant, but I don't think that's necessarily a negative thing, just becoming more proactive in what they want to see happen and the changes that they want to see in their communities. Native Americans struggle for equality. Despite their cultural diversity, Native Americans as a group have been the poorest Americans and have suffered from the highest unemployment rate. In 1961, representatives from 61 Native American groups met in Chicago and drafted the Declaration of Indian Purpose, which stressed the determination of Native Americans to choose our own way of life. It called for new policies designed to create economic opportunities for Native Americans on their reservations. In 1968, President Lyndon Johnson established the National Council on Indian Opportunity to ensure that programs reflect the needs and desires of the Indian people. And ultimately, they just wanted to be more proactive, have control over their own communities, and not kind of have these laws enacted that put them in situations that led them to have high unemployment rates, high rates of alcoholism within their reservations. Voices of protest. Many young Native Americans were dissatisfied with the slow pace of reform. Their discontent fueled the growth of the American Indian Movement, AIM, a Native American rights organization. For some, this new activism meant demanding Native American lands, burial grounds, and fishing and timber rights to be restored. In 1972, the AIM leader organized the Trails of Broken Treaties March in Washington, D.C., to protest the U.S. government's treaty violations throughout history. The marchers temporarily occupied a government building, destroyed records, and caused up to $2 million in property damage. A new women's movement arises. The theory behind the women's movement of the 1960s was feminism, the belief that women should have economic, political, and social equality with men. Feminist beliefs had gained a momentum during the mid 1800s and in 1920 won women the right to vote. While the women's movement declined after this achievement, it reawakened during the 1960s, inspired by the political activism of the times. In 1950, only 1 out of 3 women worked for wages. By 1960, that number had increased to about 40%. Still, at this time, many jobs were considered men's work, and women were shut out. Jobs available to women were mostly clerical work, domestic service, retail, sales, social work, teaching, and nursing, and many of these were not high paying. Women in the workplace. In 1961, President Kennedy appointed the Presidential Commission on the Status of Women. In 1963, the commission reported that women were paid far less than men, even when doing the same jobs. Women were seldom promoted to management positions, regardless of their education, experience, and ability. These new publicized facts awakened many women to their unequal status in society. The Equal Rights Amendment. As the women's movement progressed, women began to question all sorts of gender based distinctions. In 1971, Congress passed a ban on gender discrimination in any educational program or activity receiving federal financial assistance as part of the Higher Education Act. Congress also passed the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA, in 1972, which at first seemed like a triumph for the women's movement. The amendment needed to be ratified or approved by 38 states for it to become part of the Constitution. This would guarantee that both men and women would enjoy the same rights and protections under the law. However, the amendment scared many people, primarily conservatives. Many felt that women could be drafted into the military, homemakers would lose certain protections, and so a Stop ERA campaign was launched in 1972. By June of 1982, the deadline to ratify the ERA was up, and not enough states had approved the amendment, so it never actualized. So let's stop and think. How did Native Americans and women organize in the 1960s? So we see both of these groups speaking out and trying to establish themselves, being able to exercise their rights, and ultimately just wanting to be treated equally and seeing what's fair, having access to all of the same things that mainstream America had. So we're done with the notes. We're done with this unit. Make sure to go back, review all of your key terms to prepare for our quiz.